first off, I'd say there's a flow, and I think that, and again, it's just really interesting. I think Americans have a very different perspective on these topics and definitions and terms from Europeans, who have a more kind of visceral and, if you will, immediate relationship with, Mussolini, Hitler, all that, as well as now with the rise of the extreme right in Europe. Um, and so it's a conversation of perspective. Now, having said that, I realized as I was doing my reading and stuff how much I was just kind of throwing some of these words around and not really understanding like the connection and the depth or what have you. And so I think that, for example, patrimonialism, Max Weber's term, when Adam Wolfenson kind of said to me, well, it's not Trump is not really a fascist. He's a patrimonialist. And I was like, well, what the hell does that mean? Right. And so sitting with that, I discovered that, okay, so this is basically a political figure who comes in and views the state as an extension of personal property and views the mechanisms of state as vehicles by which to enrich themselves. You think Marcos in the Philippines, I think, is a good example of that type of thing. And then as a way of executing on that understanding of the role of the state, uses loyalty networks to basically advance their agenda and enrich, self and their others, if you will, and views those loyalty networks over law, over rule of law, and policy and practice and anything else. This is the response you see when Trump says, "Oh, that person wasn't nice to me, and so I'm going to levy a 50% tariff." Right? I mean, it's that kind of mindset and thinking. And I never really had thought about it on those terms before. And so I think that's a starting place for our experience in the United States around how some of this has happened. I would remind us that many folks have said that Donald Trump would not have run for office were it not for Barack Obama's joking with him or at his expense at, I think it was the Al Smith dinner in New York, whenever that was, like 12 years ago or whatever, publicly kind of humiliating, Trump and saying, well, I'm actually president and you would never be president kind of thing. And he was like, well, actually, I'll show you. And then we're off to the races. And so I think that there's a lot of just kind of personal, you talk about the personal retribution work. I mean, all this stuff speaks to more of a patrimonial approach. But what happens is as you're there and you're viewing it on those terms, it moves into forms of authoritarianism because he then, and then this is not just him, people who are in that position who are advancing these practices begin to centralize power. They begin to put constraints on opposition through a variety of different tools and mechanisms, initially on the basis of, you don't show me enough fealty, you don't show me enough respect, you don't show me whatever. It's still coming from that very personal kind of place. But the way that it rolls out is to constrain opposition, to basically call out people that he thinks aren't really kind of showing enough respect and all that. And then ultimately that leads to, I think, the managing dissent, even without kind of mass mobilization, right? I mean, we saw obviously in January 6th, that's how, he basically stepped up. Nobody's doing that anymore on the right because they've won, right? So they're basically inside figuring out how do you use the levers of government to promote and advance kind of their interests and their work. And so that all speaks to more of a traditional authoritarian approach and understanding. And the trick is that then there are elements of kind of fascism that come through that, but also it's not necessarily fascist at that point because it's lacking a sense of story or narrative that's broader. And I think that what fascism brings forward is the whole idea of what's been called mythic nationalism, and this story of kind of oppression of our group. And so therefore we've had to take over, like we're the victims in this whole thing. And so we've had to take over the power and the authority to be able to defend ourselves. And an extension of that then becomes this idea of almost like the purification, the nationalism stuff, what does it mean to be an American kind of thing, us against immigrants, all of that, the scapegoating. And it then begins to kind of move into this other space where you get what we're seeing now, which is the militarization of police, the use of ICE as extensions, not of really of law, but of this story of, who we are. And we're protecting, our community, we're protecting our people, we're protecting our families from these evil others, right? And so what's been interesting to just understand is the way that these three concepts kind of connect, flow, and advance each other. And, I think that I used to kind of think more, I didn't think very much at all about authoritarianism. And I thought more that, well, there's a fascist who basically has a coup and takes over a country. And then all of a sudden you've got, this character that we have to deal with. And that all happens kind of overseas. That's not what happens here. And I think all of us have become much more aware of what happened in the United States in the 1930s in terms of the fascist movements, the American Nazi Party. I mean, all of these kind of things that I certainly, I mean, I knew about, but I wasn't as just cognizant of as part of our kind of trajectory and story of a country and all that. And so that's, let me just stop there. But I think that's kind of how those three elements play out. But also, we need to recognize they have played out historically within the United States over decades as well. This is not simply a Trump issue, it's a broader kind of historic flow and arc that we're really dealing with, which helps me at least place myself within that because I realize, wow, I mean, it's not just the current Democratic Party not having an agenda. It's a broader lack of response or a counter response. In Buddhism, you talk about reverse movement, where as you advance something here, because everything is one and all connected, something else is going to come back at you from the other side because it's all connected, right? And so I think this is part of what we're grappling with as well.